Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com. Today I'm talking about my first ever portfolio. Don't worry, this is not an ego trance. This is an exercise I thought might be useful to help new designers and artists, not just the new, but I guess people who are stuck in a rut today. The idea is that it was partisan, it was balls out, it was rough and raw, too raw in places for sure, but that's why I'm going to discuss it and break down the images within, so that hopefully it will help you when considering what is your point of view, what is your voice, what is the story you're looking to tell as a human creator, because it's vital in this age of AI. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? My name is Ben Talon. I am the host of the Creative Condition podcast, the founder of the Creative Condition, artist, writer and creativity coach. That might be the smoothest I've ever said in my bio, you know. That's pretty good, wasn't it? How are you doing? How was your weekend? I'm here on a Monday morning. I'm fresh off the back of recording a brain dump episode. They're usually coming around 10 minutes and it's a little bit of a train of thought that I think might be useful or interesting in some way to break up the long form episodes. I know the show can be a little heavy in its duration at times, though, with the diary that I put out now, which admittedly I've got a little behind on at the moment. And the guest episodes tend to come in at like an hour and 20 minutes. And I know that's an investment for some people. So I like to break it up with these snappier, shorter trains of thought that are also useful around creativity. But dig in today because I'm going into the maiden portfolio. This portfolio existed first in 2008, excuse me, maybe late 2007, I'm not sure. It began around, probably started late 2007, but I took it to market in 2008. I will get into all of that shortly. First, a quick thank you to the sponsor of the show, founding sponsor, been here since day one, utterly vital to this show, Illustration X. They represent a global roster of artists and illustrators that is unrivaled. Check them out at illustrationx.com along with the great work they do for the industry. They're just, yes, they're awesome supporters of this show. That's all you need to know. So have a look, illustrationx.com. And the Ukrainian Institute doing incredibly important work for the brave and bold, embattled creative community there over in Ukraine in this horrible time of war. They share the work of the creative community, help to connect them worldwide, which I don't need to particularly explain the importance of. ui.org.ua. Right, housekeeping, thecreativecondition.com. That's all my creativity resources. Go and have a look. Reading list, curated selection of books to help you develop and grow in your creativity from many different angles, psychology type stuff. There's fiction, there's non-fiction. It's stuff that has in some way been pivotal to the development of my own creativity that I wanted to share with you guys. So check that out. There's also the archive of the show, over 300 episodes of gold in terms of learning. So many generous guests who've given me their time, from neuroscience, psychology and sport to design and art and, you know, filmmaking and everything in between. I love it. It's becoming a life's work, is this stuff, this whole body of work around creativity. So have a look at the archive. Also there at thecreativecondition.com. And of course, if you want to delve a little bit deeper and a bit more personal, we can work together. I'm also a creativity coach. 2 years in the game now. Love doing this work. Love seeing transformative action for my clients and helping people and hearing stories and helping them to join the dots. So if you're either stuck, starting out, want a change of lanes and you want to work with someone, an external eye on this, then I am your man. I will help to elevate your game, champion your stories, see things in you and your personality that you might not have detected yourself, and help to just bundle that up into something that gives you some conscious direction. If that sounds good, check it out, thecreativecondition.com/coach. So I hope you guys have been well. Today I'm going to get into my very first portfolio. Now, this was quite the emotional experience, putting it all together. I mean, finding all that work back from 2008, it wasn't too difficult, actually. It took a little bit of ratting around to get the high res of certain things. Didn't quite manage it on one or two, but it's all passable. And I wanted to do this, not out of some kind of memory lane or nostalgia blast or ego trip, but actually to help establish what is the balance of personality and technical competence and storytelling, because it's going to differ for every person. But I think there are pillars that we need to hit. I think first and foremost, point of view and story. You need to communicate what you stand for, who you are, what you bring, what that energy for you as a personality is, because every good founder that I've spoken to talks about the importance of not just the technical ability that you need to show or the work you've done, but actually what you stand for, who you are, what you're going to bring to a team in terms of energy. I mean, I say that that's something that's consistent with all the good founders, people who are industry leaders. I'm talking Simon Dixon, I'm talking Max Ottignon from Ragged Edge, I'm talking Jack Renwick. Jack Renwick's studio, it's critical. And then I think statement of intent, I would say, slightly above what you've done and the work you can do. Because if it's just the work you can do and it's just technical competence, you might be really, really good. I've seen this with many, many people, but you are in a vastly crowded market, in an industry that is crying out for originality and some intent, some balls, for want of a better word, And I think that you have to lead from the front. It doesn't have to be, vulnerable, personal. All these things that people ask about, that's a barometer that is down to the individual, the personality, the sensitivity, the introversion or extroversion or something in between. That must determine how much of yourself you give away and in what form. Some people might want to be very, an activist. They might want to work with edgy, confrontational work, but other people might be really subversive and go with abstraction and subtlety, minimalism. That's beside the point. That's up to you. That should be a reflection of who you are, what is comfortable for you, and what work you want to attract. But it has to have personality. It has to have a place in the market, a point. What is a point of view? So a point of view, I think, is where you're coming from, how you tackle projects, what energy you feed into that, how you show originality on behalf of your clients. I think it's really, really important. Of course, technical competency is really important. You're not going to get much. If the work's shit, you're not going to get very far. Let's put it that way. And statement of intent. I think self-initiated work and creating work with meaning and feeling is really important. Again, I see so many people with a very technical portfolio, very competent portfolio, beautifully presented. But if it stops there and there's no statement of intent, then how is someone going to connect the energy of their studio and the personality of their studio, whatever the position you're going for, with who you are? That's what screams to people. That's what attracts people. I really believe that. So they're things to consider, those three pillars. And I found this in this portfolio. At times it was crude. There's certainly a lot of room for improvement with technical mastery. I was just not there yet, but this was my first year in business. So of course, that's something you have to surrender to that. That's for the same for all of us. No matter where you are on the journey, there's going to be potential for improvement that you have to tackle as you go along. But that perfectionism can trip us up. I found that by getting this portfolio into the world early and being, passionate and getting behind it, I connected with people who wanted to reward that, who liked that kind of energy. Sorry, I've got a brew on the go today. It's early doors, recording this on a Monday. But here's the intro I wrote. So 4 hard drives later, and I've managed to piece together 90% of the first illustration portfolio I took to market back in 2008. This all started during a recent conversation with a close friend and fellow illustrator, Danny Allison, who shared a studio with me during this time. We'd both found ourselves at something of a creativity crossroads. That's more recent, speaking of. We both have 2 children, and we're still sustaining ourselves from a mixture of work across various artistic disciplines. But the world has changed. We have changed. Some of those changes for the better, some for the worse. We reminded each other of the edge in our work back in those early days. We inspired and motivated each other. Danny was 2 years into the game. I had a maiden portfolio and no clients, so the work was comprised of mocked-up editorial articles in the absence of any actual industry experience, and social commentary, some clumsy and crass, some closer to clever, but all with an edge and a point of view. Today, I have 18 years of experience and many impressive client names, but at times, I feel some of that early intent and zest I'm missing. I'd never censor myself, but we change with age, and my gallows humour lives largely in my writing. Maybe there'll come a time when I once more get political in my art, but as a storyteller using different disciplines, I don't want to force something that was the product of a passionate 20-something-year-old. It has to be felt, and you'll see below just how much I was feeling about the world around me, from the 2008 financial crash to the climate crisis and Cruft's dog show. So I'm going to share it in the hope it might help others tune into their own voice, to use their internal spirit to forge their brand of creativity, not the external, the dispiriting sameness of trend-based work. So stylistically, I'd only recently scrapped a clumsy collage style that I'd been using, and it was really over-influenced by the trends of the time, the Guardian and Dazed and Confused and Time Out. And it took some advice from Danny when he sort of said, look, this collage stuff is not great. Like, there's a lot of people doing it better than you. But when did you stop drawing? Because your drawing was second to none and it had so much spark in there. And that landed with me when we were sharing this freezing cold studio in Oyster Mill in Preston. I believe that loose, raw drawing style captured my personality, my inability to polish anything, and my roots, having grown up in a small working-class mill town full of beautiful oddballs. I've said to you guys before, but I've heard it described by a drunk person as one giant Star Wars bar, and that really had an impact on me. Combine that with a storytelling father, storytelling uncle, two of them actually, two uncles married to storytelling, one really into punk, and one really into kind of writing. He used to write comedy for like Bob Monkhouse and I think the Two Ronnies at one point. You know, he did well, very in and out in terms of a career. He dipped in and out of doing it. It was just a passion for him. But I grew up around that and all these oddballs. So how could that not have an effect on me? And, you know, the dirge and the kind of greyness of these working class mill towns in the north, put all that together and you kind of get a sense of why my work looked like it looked. The minimal use of colour was simply my fear of using more colour and my technical inability when it came to Photoshop. This would in time evolve, but here it forced me to think about what any use of colour conveyed. And scarcity is an incredibly valuable tool in creativity. So that said, let's get into it. So this is designed, I know this is a visual exercise, so head to my LinkedIn newsletter, The Creative Condition. By the time this show comes out, I will get this piece up on the Creative Condition website also. So head there and go to articles and you'll find it and you can kind of scroll along to see the pieces that I'm talking about. So number one, the credit crunch. This piece is horrible and I thought this was lost to time. I dug it out from one of my old hard drives and it's a horrific image of honey, you know, the honey monster from UK cereal brand Sugar Puffs. And I drew this horrible kind of emaciated, bald, mangy sugar puff monster with a arsehole mouth and smacked up eyes. Really, really horrible creation. It was a mock-up cereal box. Just said credit crunch, 0% extra free with Money Madness. And it's quite funny looking back because the content is quite... This was being done, you know, the whole crunch thing brought on this cereal parody. And I saw this done later on by other people. I was by no means an originator. I'm sure I wasn't the first to do this. But it made us laugh. And this was really important. So, you know, I wrote in the pieces, look at this puckered mouth, those ribs and that tail. My drawing would improve dramatically. It was very fine liner driven. I since went on to use dip pen and ink and really get a kind of mastery of the flow of that. But the naivety and the presence of the human hand in this work, it worked. That fine liner stuff worked, you know. It had this kind of accessibility because of that naivety. And while cliched, the cereal box take on the financial crash had personality and playfulness that endeared me to art directors looking for soul in a style, not just aesthetic beauty. We'll get more into stories about that coming up. So number two, the shame game. This was an early mock-up. I would get pages of The Guardian and scan them in or other magazines, cut out what was used, like a photograph when I saw an opportunity for an illustration, and illustrate it myself. And this was a way of kind of comping it together, putting it in context for a client that I would have killed to have worked with at that time. I was convinced that I would go on to work for The Guardian at that point. At the same time, you had that kind of imposter syndrome going on that all new people encounter. But I would mock up these pieces. And this was a piece, the headline was, "Could humiliation be the next weapon in our war on crime?" So it was this kind of... marker pen take of like an orange prison outfit and, you know, people pointing, the really naive little horrible people pointing and eyes everywhere on this piece done in pencil on like a faded texture background with bits of acrylic. And I would send these things to people like Roger Browning, art director at The Guardian, who had to weather my early harassment of a newspaper that I'd convinced myself, like I said, that I'd be published in. I knew that there was an opportunity in editorial. We'd been taught at university that today's news is tomorrow's chip paper, so the risk of commissioning new illustrators was low. The idea is that fuck up and you won't be used again. That's as bad as it gets. There's less writing on one page of a newspaper on one day than a huge ad campaign, for example, which months of work have to go into, a huge budget. So there is a lot more fear around that. I can't tell you the amount of potential ad campaigns that I've had pulled at the last minute because someone shit themselves over an organic style. So my choice of mocked up articles did show self-awareness. That's the point I wanted to make here, because I would select these topics that made me feel something, that would benefit from the edge in my hand-drawn illustrations. So this, combined with the social commentary, was something that Roger Browning was drawn to in a coffee and portfolio meeting that I had with him in London. We went across the road from the Guardian's offices, we got a coffee, sat down, and it was the big part of the reason that he later gave me a crucial early break illustrating the cover of the film and music section that he had one Friday, which came as a shock to me. I wasn't ready for that level. I thought I was going to be tucked away, some little spot illustration in the back of the newspaper, but no, he threw me in the deep end. And with hindsight, I think it was a passable piece. Let's end it there. That's as good as it got. But 3 days later, I got a commission for the sports section because, delivering on time, reliably, getting the job done, getting published, said that I was for real. And Roger then told the people at the sports desk that there was a lot of sports work in my portfolio that I'd mocked up, which unfortunately I couldn't find for this. They were the only bits missing. I remember doing this piece about Rafa Benitez, the then Liverpool manager, being on the brink and going with like a cartoon saw coming up through the floor and making a hole that he would drop through under his feet concept, sending that to Doug Cheeseman at When Saturday Comes magazine, who did become my first editorial client, properly published. Very exciting times. But again, with the football and sports stuff, it was showing that intent and the proof of knowledge on the subject and belonging to that cause, that I could do this, that I knew about football, that I wouldn't have to be educated. So that's where I was with that. And the Guardian Sport would go on to commission me for several years after that, which is very exciting. So on to the next piece, Silly Fucking Humans. This, you can see it, have a look at it. Giant penguin, menacing eye, naively drawn 2D black and white, fine liner pen, towering over some kind of militia come terrorist guy, I don't know. Mask, balaclava with eyes, big machine gun, army jacket, and the words typographically hand-lettered, Silly Fucking Humans. Bizarre and brutal. Not my finest hour at all when it came to, activism, as in the cleverness or the intelligence shown there, or commentary, but an emotional lash out at humanity, which I found myself loathing at that time, really loathing, as I learned more about the problems we were causing ourselves along with the rest of the natural world. With a gun to my head now, I couldn't break down all the thinking behind this piece. But I did take pleasure in the black and white graphic treatment and the way the subversive, unsettling quality seemed to get people nodding along when they saw this work, expressing a similar dismay. It's like so warped and weird, but people just went, yeah, I feel like that too. And it wasn't just a type, there was something about that penguin just towering over this, this man who you sort of think, what are you doing? Why are you a part of a militia? I'm sure you believe your cause, but all these tensions and troubles in the world troubled me greatly at the time, and I wanted to live in a world that was more optimistic and more bent around creativity. So, with the wind in my sails from writing about graphic activism as I graduated in 2006, learning about Banksy and Ken Garland and Blake Larat and Stefan Sagmeister's courageous design work at that time, just had me, growling, snarling, wanting to make a positive change in the world. And I do often wonder if I would have dared to be so brazen had I been 25 today, I'm sure many people censor themselves, and to me that's a real shame. I work with coaching clients and help them to find their authenticity, to find the balance of personal voice and good intentions, because now is the time that artists should be standing up for a better future, albeit with a little more consideration than this piece. As artists, we do have a voice. Most good agency owners I've met yearn for personality, story and soul in the portfolios of the people they want to hire. I mentioned that at the top of the show, the Dicks and Baxys and the Ragged Edges of the world. They want to want to see soul, want to see some fire. They don't just want technical competency, because they could pick from, bloody hell, so many, like hundreds of thousands of talented people. But how you set yourself out on a different level is that soul, is that personality. And this weirdness for me would generate deeper connections with the people who viewed the work, getting us past small talk. It was different and it was memorable. Piece number 4, all creatures pale and bald. So this is a withered sort of battery chicken, skinny neck, not much hair left on it, just a few tragic little bits of feathers sticking up from it, and a sad kind of anxious eye on there. And this was a piece I put some real soul into, and a very naive hand lettering style with a collage Bible reference, mock Bible. It's not an actual Bible reference, but it's it's designed to look like a sort of reference for a psalm, so to speak. And I was on a train from London when I got inspired for this piece, London to Preston, and I peeked through that little gap that you get between the seats, and I saw this old lady sort of comically dripping in this religious bling, like massive gold crucifixes, reading a little pocket Bible on the table, and this little innocent fly lands on the table next to her. I remember it was in summer, and she just brought a palm down and destroyed the poor thing, just smashed it there and then before pulling out this, handkerchief and wiping her hand. And I just couldn't believe it. I was so angry. I had to really bite my tongue not to say something to her. But I just immediately thought of the all creatures great and small. One of those kind of binding teachings of religions and spirituality, that we are all equal with all other living things and we should teach them accordingly. This was the complete opposite to that. And it came to mind as I wrestled with more misanthropy, and I think misanthropy, if I'm correct, is that loathing of our own species, of our own kind. And that's exactly what I felt. So I smashed this unsavoury incident together with the sadness of battery farming that permeated me at the time and continues to do today, and created that image, all creatures pale and bald. Number 5, eBay Fant. This was a kind of mock eBay post with a dead elephant with its tusk broken off. Power seller was the kind of graphic that I used. I don't know if you remember that on eBay. I don't know if it's still a thing. And the buy it now icon. And this was in response to tragically learning about ivory being sold on eBay, not being policed, and it leading to the sad termination of a beautiful species in elephants. Again, this moved me, and I mentioned this at the top of the show, but you can feel the pain coming through this portfolio. I was hurting, and I am hurting today. I have had to go through a lot of anxiety and inner turmoil around life and death and the environment and all these things. And this was just another piece. There was more colour here. I used the eBay colours, using marker pens to colour this elephant with. Not the best execution, admittedly, the drawing nor the colours, but again, it showed something. This was a rare attempt at full colour. Technically poor, admittedly, but the message was obvious. Too obvious, underwhelming in fact. But yet another emotional expression of a desire to contribute to meaningful causes, something that would bring people and publications and clients into my life in a great way and enrich it. I was never a perfectionist, and my willing to share that work early and often accelerated my career by helping me connect with others and gain valuable feedback. Number 6, Seasons Beatings. This is a rough one. This was 2 hooded figures standing over a fallen man or woman dressed as an elf. I think I had a man in mind because it tended to be, I think, guys at the time who were getting attacked unprovoked in Preston. And I made this into a 2008 Christmas card design that I actually sent out to to prospective clients. Unbelievable looking back. Like I said, lived in Preston where there'd been a string of unprovoked attacks on people walking home. Now, a little older and wiser, I see that this was mishandled. It was well-meaning, an attempt at social commentary. The drawing was poor. It was done in fine liner. It was scratchy, too scratchy, not cool bad, and unnecessarily graphic. Like, it didn't need the pool of blood. I think that that was young and exuberant, young and foolish, full of energy. And I don't think it added anything particularly positive to the conversation. These days, I think I would have gone the route of interviewing people for the podcast about doing great work around young people who've had tough starts. So, for example, the episode with Bike Storm's founders Mac Ferrari and Jake 100 did a better job, I think, than this image did. That's not to say that I didn't believe in art as activism, because that also has an important part to play. Drawing was all I had at that time, so it came out through image making. And I wasn't always going to get it right. But that all said, I did get wonderful feedback from recipients who got these Christmas cards for raising an important topic, even if it was a little clumsily handled, and not shying away from the severity of the situation. Because look where we are in the world today. We need people to step up and not shy away. Still, my younger self. Okay, number 7, being watched. All I remember about this is being delighted by the expressive and layered line work on the left side. And that it was a pink sunset outside the studio windows, and that Radiohead's In Rainbows, which was on loop in my world at the time, added a very lucid and trippy mood during a late night at the studio, where I was feeling very excited about my creative future. So as for that layering on the left side, you might ask, why are you telling me about this? Why is that relevant to me? There's something about making your own work and being brave enough to include work that feels like a step forward, because we can quite easily get trapped in stylistic patterns of our own. You know, you get known for a style, or you decide that you have a style, and that's it. And if we're not careful, the negative side is we cut off possibility. But at this time, I went from very kind of heavy black line, and quite graphic in some areas, to really starting to let the line work play out. So in this image, if you're looking at it right now, I use myself as reference in the bottom left corner, a very worried looking person looking back over their shoulder. There's a pub in an empty street, and an old school British red telephone box, and a weird figure, almost masked, almost golem-like, peering and kind of straddling itself around that phone box, peeping out. But the pub window behind the head bleeds through the line work of the head. I didn't want to cut that off, and the bike wheel is front and centre in the face, and it kind of shouldn't be. But I remember doing it and feeling like, I don't want to stop drawing, I want to keep overlapping here, so I just let myself go. And I allowed the wheel to stay in the final, because for me it added some humanity and some authenticity to this piece that might not have been there otherwise. And the way I drew the lamppost is kind of slightly wonky and too scratchy in its line work, but it all sort of works. So I allowed it to live in the portfolio. And what I found throughout my career is that if you include work like that you feel energized about and feel good about, even if it feels a little uncomfortable because it's new, it's amazing who it can attract in terms of more experienced eyes to help you to evolve and move forward accordingly. That kind of overlapping of line work I will be encouraged by good art directors to do, and to allow that fluidity and that freedom through more, because my first drafts would always be, and still are to a degree today, quite rigid. I'll always go through that process of tightening up and a fear-based drawing before the client comes back and goes, no, this isn't you. We came to you for this, real you. Do more of that. This happened a lot in my early career and really helped me to evolve that style. Other than that, I think the rest of this drawing is one for the psychologists to peck at. I don't know what was going on in my head at this point, but I do still like it. Number 8, Talon versus Alison and the birth of the Verses series. So Danny, Alison and I, when we shared, this was my second studio, and when we shared together with 3 other artists, all at the very advent of our careers. Very exciting time, very energising to have a shared workspace. Very affordable looking back at the time as well. Big old mill called Oyster Mill in Preston. Thick concrete floors, freezing cold in the winter. It's getting very sweaty in the summer. But the energy in that place was about amusement and about excitement and making each other laugh and just having fun and mucking around and seeing what came from that. That all said, we were still grafters. We worked hard. We were at the start of something that was going to be our way out of working in shit jobs that didn't fulfill us. God, we had enough of them. I actually had one of my best jobs just before leaving, which was at Preston City Council as a recycling officer. I loved that job. Great people, great energy in the workforce, very supportive of my career, and actually helped me to leave to go on to that career. Very giving. Not many companies would do that. They would feel annoyed that you were leaving them, kind of thing. But these guys were right behind me. But I wasn't trained in anything else. So my alternative was random agency jobs, which that job was one of. I got lucky on that instance. But on many other occasions, I was parked up in the corner of a factory, filing physical records or doing very much just churn work, and it wasn't the best. So this was an exciting time, and this was a reflection of the laughs we had in that place. So creating this mock boxing / wrestling poster, pitting myself against Danny illustration, unsanctioned deathmatch, Preston Fish Market toilets, gents in graphics with an asterisk at the bottom, asterisk for legal reasons. And it was just so exciting to be a part of something and doing this and making this stupid work that just made each other laugh, but it brought a lot of soul, and it did express that sense of humour and that flippancy and irreverence that is really important, I think, in illustration portfolio. We don't want rigid, overfinished stuff. I don't think anyone truly does, and it might have its place in some places, but ultimately, especially now with AI, people want that point of view that I keep going back to. Very, very exciting time. We didn't go... That humour assumes in infinite forms, so from the way a line is drawn, that can convey humour, the tone of a song, or a colour selection, right through to a full-on Mr. Bingo, like cock and balls. There's a place for all kinds of humour, so what's yours and where does it live in your work? Because again, we have to look at ways to convey who we are, what we can bring to the table, whether it's for a job, a project, or our personal brand. Number 9, Giz a Job. My first business card design. So I drew Giz a Job. I have no idea why a Harlequin, why this sort of Joker character. Maybe it was in some way capturing what I loved about, old films like Oliver, where it's these cheeky chappy characters who are kind of rough around the edges, a little bit mischievous, doing what they need to do to get by. That's how I felt at this time. As a working class lad coming to an industry that seemed for a while impenetrable, but I just felt so in love with image making that I had to try and make something of it. At the end of the day, I'd spent a lot of money, got myself in debt through student loans and the likes to get an illustration degree. I'd studied graphic design at college, did a first year of a graphic media communications degree before going to UCLan in Preston and studying illustration. So I'd put my eggs in a basket and that was it. But I often felt like I didn't belong in an industry that, seemed... I don't know, I didn't feel like there were gatekeepers, but it just felt like a world I didn't understand, so I did feel like a bit of an alien at times. So I wanted to sort of convey that. I wanted to convey that feeling, and Giz a Job captured that perfectly. And I'll be honest, the laughs that this got from people that I gave the business card to was infectious. I loved it. They all admired that business card, because again, it stood for something, and it was a very funny, simple take on a business card and very different. And it got me lots of conversations that completely transcended small talk. Number 10, Tyson versus Thatcher. So this, the climax of the Versus series, that series of personal illustrations pitting very unlikely people from across society against each other. In this instance, former UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and, famous boxer Mike Tyson, got me some positive press. This was very much a product of humour, we were finding funny at the time, but also an interest in hand lettering, an interest in in expressing humour through my work. Like I said, gravitating towards fight sports. I say fight sports, professional wrestling. I know it's not real. I know it's not real fighting, but it's still this high risk, this kind of storytelling driven versus world. I found that incredibly exciting, and I wanted to go and work in that world eventually. So why not create a series of raw posters? And this was seen by a director at Channel 4 who came down to a group show I was a part of in London. And he had a chat and he said, look, that piece has made me and my partner laugh so much. Like, I had to come and say hello. But also, I've got an idea. I've got this thing coming up that we could talk about. So I said, okay. And he couldn't tell me anything at the time, but he called me a few weeks later and we ended up working together on a vignette, TV advertising vignette for Skins, very cult TV show at the time. And it was a great experience. He partnered me with Mike Maloney from Art and Graft, who held my hand, given that I'd never worked in motion before, who educated me on how to prepare PSDs for animating. And what a great step out of what was predominantly editorial in my career. And thanks to the Versus series piece, that's what was in that initial portfolio that got me my first step outside of editorial. And I must admit, the work that I've created in my career that was utterly outrageous and raw, that really personal stuff that transcends commercial, it has always had a way of attracting the best aligned opportunities, because I'm expressing who I am and what I love and some very real part of my personality, and that tends to attract others in our industry who resonate with that, because people are looking for real and a shared human connection. Number 11, Polar Bear. Another piece motivated by the sadness and the anger I felt over environmental destruction by humanity. This time specifically about the wasteful use of resources, in toys in this case, and the irony in the nature of some children's toys and stories. I as a kid, as a parent now, I look at some of the books about wildlife and about sort of animal characters in particular, and I think, is this just a cliched, well-selling go-to character? Or is this something that you've researched, that you actually understand something about the reality of that character's existence? Because I found a great deal of upset in this depiction of environments and creatures that are actually endangered and are under threat, and with no acknowledgement for that. I almost feel like I'm cheating my kids in some way if I'm painting a picture of a world full of biodiversity with certain creatures, if I can't tell them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to send my kids into like mental health spirals at the age of 6. So I'm very tender, I'm very guarded and careful about the way that I talk about the likes of the climate crisis, deforestation and things. But I do allude to these things. I do mention that if we're not careful, we don't care for this planet, if we don't protect those species and use our intelligence properly to make a better world, then living things can't live. And they say, well, no, if there are no bugs, there's no us either, Dad. And they know that kind of stuff. I park it there because I don't want them to be doomed out by the time they get to year 3 or whatever. But as they get older, I want to give them the resilience to handle what's going on in the world, but also the impetus and the energy to do something about it, to contribute to something better on that front. So it's a delicate balance. But the pain that I feel looking back at this piece is still it's very present. This is an old piece, like I said, 2008. We're talking 18 years now, and yet I was making this stuff. I didn't realise I was so aware already back then. I would have been 25, but of course I was. It's unignorable in this portfolio. So there you go. That was again another expression of my editorial skills too. Again, not the it's all right. The concept's sort of there. Could have been better, but that's where I was at that time, and I was never afraid to share. Number 12, The Feral 5. Very, very raw, this one. A parody of an Enid Blyton cover. I remember reading Secret 7 as a kid and loving the mystery and the wonder that those books conjured in me. And then, as you get older and you see too much news, and I saw child soldiers involved in the news, and that just broke my heart. That innocence is lost for so many kids for these causes that are a product of a world in turmoil, I suppose. In some way, it always has been this way. There have always been conflicts and crusades and the likes, and that just made me sad to think of these kids in masks with guns, that they're missing out on the innocence of childhood and the chance to actually relax and find their feet as to who they are in life. And maybe that was never a part of their culture, and maybe that's what they're rebelling against, and who am I to say if that's right or wrong? But that's what I was thinking at this time, and this was a very edgy piece that I was quite shocked to find, when I found it. And I look at the treatment on the unfinished drawings of the legs on these kids, and it's terrible. And, the bad sort of graphic design of the Enid Blyton cover is there for all to see. But I like the drawing of this looking back. It's very mischievous. There's something quite guerrillas about the kids' faces, like Jamie Hewlett style work. But moreover, I can't believe that this kind of horrific, thought-provoking work was in that portfolio. But I'm glad that it was, because like I said, it got me The Guardian, it got me clients like The Big Issue that were aligned and meant something. You're talking about a person who studied graphic activism for his dissertation at university. So I'm very glad that I did, and it didn't break too many eggs to the point where I was cancelled or kicked out. And I know there's sort of more risk of that in today's world. But I think if it's done with sympathy and well-meaning qualities, I think that the clients really worth working with will see the joy and the talent in that, and not cancel you, so to speak, or take you off the list. Maybe I'm wrong. Number 13, Dog Sniff. Utterly ridiculous. I'm not going to dwell on this one because I came close to having this image of a small dog sniffing the arse of a bigger dog tattooed on my arse. I was very convinced that was a good idea at one point. Thankfully, I never did, but this was an utterly silly piece of work created, again, to make people laugh. No more, no less. Number 14, the overbreeders. So this was a piece lashing out at the kind of Crufts culture, the show dog culture, where dogs were being bred to damaging effects for their breathing and for their condition. And I felt quite strongly, and still feel quite strongly about that, because I'm a big animal lover. And, you know, if you haven't picked up on that throughout this episode, then I don't know what's going on, but you know, it's there. It's all these mutant dogs. I kind of elaborated on these dogs that have, you know, people accused of being overbred and for aesthetics as opposed to their own well-being, which I found incredibly sad. And it was a montage of, there's a little group of people stood at the back with florets sort of judging, and then they're getting into sort of almost Gerald Scarfe territory of you know, warped proportions and features. And yeah, there's a dog at the back there that's almost like a jellyfish. I remember creating that with his massive oversized tongue and bulbous forehead. And it's quite dark when you look at this piece. But again, expressions of interest and a desire for meaningful work. Youthful hunger. Again, some of this stuff I could have done with more, you know, tenderness and maybe a clever subversive approach. But I was young and I was partisan and I was up for it all. So, you know, there you go. Mutant dogs is what you get. Number 15, another editorial mock-up excluding shipping, beginning to show a more considered use of colour here and a little bit more texture going on, you know, as I started to explore more the kind of doodly line work and watercolour wash in this case, actually. One of the first appearances of watercolour in my portfolio on this green Union Jack. I can't remember what the exact article was about, but it was about shipping almost being overlooked or omitted from carbon metrics, basically, when shipping is one of the worst in the world. To be honest, I think it's worse than like agriculture and cars combined, from what I believe. Anyway, another speculative editorial piece. I would encourage young people today to broaden their remit. You know, my stuff was very sort of edgy, topical, environmental topical. But I would say to people today, if I was giving advice, just broaden out a little bit more, show what else you got, because you will probably accelerate the range of work that you'll get and have a more interesting journey. But for me, clearly, I knew myself, I had that self-awareness, I knew what I wanted to convey, and this was a starting point. Number 16, kids go bad. So this, I still love this piece today, and it was another mock-up, this time for a magazine which had the subheader, "Are some children destined to become lifelong violent criminals? Not if you catch them early," says Anna Gosling. It was black and white. It was a red and yellow, one of those little cars that you see kids in, with a hooded arm hanging out with a cigarette between the fingers, and the other kid just looking a bit perturbed, a little girl in another car, this one without colour. And I had great fun making it, and my bad mock-up comp into the article, as I used to do back then, before sending to speculative art directors. But I loved it. Occasionally I would strike the right balance of good observation, humour and technical execution, and I believe this was one of the more successful early works in terms of achieving that. What really shines, like I said, in this portfolio is sheer positioning. My strengths and my belief and my, the volume shows that unlimited courage in expressing intentions, even if there was a lot of refining to be done. So again, where do you want to work? Be speculative, mock it up, send it to them, knock on the door, show them the goods. I was always told that it was good, particularly when pitching work or delivering a sketch, to leave the balance of ownership for the art director or the editor, whoever you're working with, and your point of view. Because if you develop a final finished thing and go, this is what I want it to be, this is what we're doing, you almost you don't respect the person you're working with and allow for their input to come back to you. So that's what I would try to do at this point, and I would show that courage and those intentions, and I would refine the work. But ultimately, I felt like I used to try to leave just enough for good feedback, for another point of view from an art director or the likes. And this was an interesting one for that. It provoked some conversation again, because it's a very topical matter, especially at the time, with all the random attacks and things that were going on. So there you go. Number 17, Kidneys on eBay. A strange and unfathomable piece that I remember including simply because I loved the line work and the colour, not because it made a lot of sense or it had an overuse anywhere. This was a very disturbing, slightly warped piece, and again, this was kidneys being sold at another eBay one. It would not have made the cut in my portfolio today under the stewardship of the mind that I have now, because I'm like, whoa, okay, this is edgy and this isn't communicating a lot. But I don't know, because again, I keep saying I've had many instances where a piece I created just for jest or not with anything in mind has opened a door into something that I would never have dreamed of. So who am I to say that? Number 18, Scout Sex. Can't even remember the article that I mocked this up for, but essentially a cactus cock and balls behind a lad with a smirk on his face and little devil horns in a scout uniform. So again, I don't quite remember what the article was about, but what you see is what you get. I wanted to get that humour across and just show what my take would be on such a thing to hit the magazines I was hoping to work for at that point. And what I will say is it was all very editorially geared, which meant that I had a target market and a real stance, a real positioning. And therefore, when I took it to editorial, I always got that kind of interest in that, a lot of stroking of the chin and this is nice. And yeah, we could do something with this. And it was a huge rush at that time, I remember. But that statement of intent is important. There's nothing wrong with having a focal point. I look at friends in the industry like Rod Hunt and Stanley Chow, who've got very digestible, very easily understood offer. Stan with his portraits, his beautiful, unique portraits. Rod with his isometric, map-style illustrations, brought them these amazing careers about. And for me, I've always needed more variation, but even within that variation, I had focal points at different time and strong threads and themes running throughout that portfolio. I would encourage you to consider finding that balance for yourselves too. Number 19, the Race versus Sex Challenge. So again, the midpoint of the Versus series, and perhaps over any of the other images in my maiden portfolio, including Talon versus Allison and Tyson versus Thatcher, got me noticed. This one in particular piqued the interest of Roger Browning. I remember it very clearly. He dwelled on this image, asked questions, enjoyed the line treatment, the simplicity of it, and the topical nature of it, which was amazing, really. With hindsight, I do better understand the magnitude of what it would have been. Barack in line to be the first black president, Clinton going to be the first woman. I got irked by it at the time and sort of said, tell me something other than that. I want to know something about their policies. There probably was. If I looked at all the media, there probably would have been a lot more. In fact, there almost certainly was a lot more than just who they were, But I now realise that both things were huge. Of course they were. How could they not have been? But, young and angry, professing to convey activism in my work. And it was a very whimsical but fun piece, again, that got people laughing. It's never failed to get a laugh. And it did get me remembered, just like Tyson versus Thatcher, just like Talon versus Allison. Something about the ridiculous nature of our brains as creative is magnetic. And if you can get that across, if you can get your interesting slant, even if it's the most done thing in the world, which boxing-style posters were pretty ubiquitous, always there, always some graphic designer doing a cool woodblock typographic print. So if you get the opportunity to do something original and different, then I would say to anyone, do it. Do it and get it out there. Be whimsical, be funny, be different, be weird. So in summary, digging all this stuff out was an absolutely wild ride for me, an emotional gamut, because this was a scary but also exciting time. I remember I had saved up 3 months' money from my job at Preston City Council to quit the job, take a bet on myself with low living costs. For the record, I was paying 150 quid a month rent with 2 other people sharing a house for 3 in Preston. It was an end terrace. It wasn't bad. There were ice sheets on the walls in winter. It was that cold. Single glazing and everything. But for all the drawbacks, we had a pretty sweet deal. And I was paying about 40 quid a month for my studio, which was a 5-minute walk down the road. Can you believe that? 190 quid for your 2 core living costs. Probably all in, I wasn't above 500 quid. Maybe if you start factoring in leisure and nights out, well, let's go 800 as a cap. But come on. I'm not going to go into today's costs as a twin father living in Salisbury, but my word, it's vastly different. But that was the time I was coming up at. I was excited and I wanted to convey that excitement. There was a lot of laughing. I wanted to get that across. I wanted to show the raw line style that I felt captured my personality and my roots as a lad from Keighley, a post-industrial working class mill town. All of that stuff was captured here, and I showed my interests. I showed what I knew about. I showed what I wanted to do. And last but not least, I showed a modicum of technical competency. And it did. The career has panned out. I do work for meaningful publications and brands and the likes, and it fills me with pleasure. And don't get me wrong, I have to take on commercial work like the next person. Sometimes it doesn't quite align. However, mainly it does. And can you ask for any more? Most days I enjoy being in my little studio in the garden, even though I get lonely and, more recently anxious. But I'm working on all that stuff. I'm looking at other shared studios. I can always change that stuff. But what you can't change, and there's no better thing to use in your career, is your personality and your lived experience. And on the censorship side of things, I want to come back to this because during a recent coaching session, my client told me that they feared making certain work. I'm not going to say what it was, who it was. With emotional punch, they were scared of being seen as someone who might rock the boat, a trouble causer. And I said to this person, you will absolutely not be seen as a trouble causer. The people you want to work with in awesome agencies that you're naming to me, which you are absolutely good enough to do, having looked at this person's portfolio, they will want to see this story. I mentioned Simon Dixon and Max Ottignon as two examples of people at Dixon Baxi and A Ragged Edge, respectively, who do value personality and story and want interesting people under the roof who can bring interesting, decent ideas that are a reflection of their unique story. So bear that in mind, guys. Rock some boats, put some meaningful, impassioned work out there. If it's all just competent and technically good, it's not enough. It won't serve you in today's market because it's so crowded and the work pool is shrinking because of AI. You have to get your head above the parapet by putting down your point of view and your statement of intent. I've been doing work around this with the wonderful Paradiso, who I've been doing some coaching training with recently under Marco Fan and Hector Ayuso. Wonderful debut festival last year, and I know they've got plans to sort of really start contributing more to leadership in the industry, to again, points of view and work with attitude, to try and break this sea of same that we're all drowning in at the moment. But there you have it anyway. For my portfolio today, you can see that at bentalon.com or head to Illustration X, the sponsor of the show, and look for Ben Talon, or Talon Type for my hand lettering, or Talon Live Event Drawing for my live work. But that's it, it's a vastly different portfolio from today's portfolio. That's neither good or bad. I looked at this and think, oh God, have I lost some of the soul in this work? Because I feel like I could do with a bit more of that spunk in today's portfolio. But at the same time, I'm so much technically better, and there is a lot of great work that has got a loose energy to it. I just don't know. It's hard to know, isn't it? It's always seeking that balance, but it was very healthy to look back at this. I hope you guys have got something out of it. Thank you for listening this week. Thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X, who you can see their global range of Illustrator and animator portfolios now at illustrationx.com. Thank you also to the Ukrainian Institute for doing the brave and inspiring work they do with the Ukrainian creative community, suffering during this horrible time of war. But these guys are helping to spread their word across the world. So have a look at the work at ui.org.ua. If you can share it, wonderful. Encourage someone, brilliant. If you can commission somebody or do something even bigger, wow, yeah, awesome, please do it. And if you want a depiction of what that looks like, go back and listen to episode 212 with the brilliantly talented and inspiringly brave Olya Protasova, talking about creativity in times of war. Thank you very much for listening, guys. If you want to work with me directly one-to-one on the coaching programs, get in touch. There are many different offers for many different budgets. I will elevate your creativity, your passion, help you to uncover your story, to use it as a compass moving forward. In fact, I have a very specific offer for that you can see at thecreativecondition.com/story. For the coaching, thecreativecondition.com/coach, but have a browse around. Loads of free creativity resources there too, because I want to look after everyone with any budget. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this portfolio. This will be a little watch-along type episode where you have to scroll through and see the images I'm talking about. You can do that at thecreativecondition.com in the articles section, or on my LinkedIn newsletter, The Creative Condition, where you'll also find the piece. Thank you for listening, guys. Please do rate, review, subscribe to the show, tell a friend. It all really helps, and I really do need that help to keep the listeners coming. Thank you. Have an awesome week. Stay creative.